Hey everybody, I'm Haley Mitchell Haugen. I'm the editor of Sheila-Na-Gig Editions and Sheila-Na-Gig Online. I'm happy to welcome you tonight as we share featured reading with poet Millicent Borges Accardi and an open mic reading with Sheila-Na-Gig Online contributors for our winter 2021-22 issue. So welcome. And Millicent Borges Accardi is a Portuguese-American writer. She's the author of 4 collections of poetry, Only More So by Salmon Press in Ireland, 2016, Injuring Eternity, Mischievous Muse, 2010, Through a Grainy Landscape, New Meridian Arts, 2021, and Quarantine Highway, FlowerSong Press, 2022. Among her awards are fellowships with the National Endowment of the Arts, Fulbright, CantoMundo, the California Arts Council, Foundation for Contemporary Arts COVID grant, Yaddo, Fundação Luso-Americana from Portugal, and the Barbara Deming Foundation, Money for Women. She founded the popular Kale Soup for the Soul reading series, Portuguese-American writers presenting work about family, food, and culture, and has written over 50 interviews with Luso writers, artists, and musicians. She lives in Southern California in the hippie enclave of Topanga Canyon. I know how to say that. I'm from there. Millicent and I go back about 30 years to our Long Beach, California poetry scene, and it's just really great to see you here, Millicent. So welcome.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm really honored to be here. And I remember the Sheila-Na-Gig days at Cal State Long Beach, and we used to have Thursday poets. And one of my books came out with Kat Speidel's press, The Mischievous Muse. And she was a friend of ours at that time too. So it's really nice to see everybody virtually. I'm gonna start out, if you just give me 1 second, I gotta load this up. I'm gonna try it reading it in Word, because everyone says I look down. So I wanted to open up with a poem that goes back in time to 1942. And I feel like it's still applicable today with what's going on in Ukraine. So I thought I'd open up with that poem, Portrait of a Girl, 1942. And it's based on the Jan Lucas photograph of a girl a few hours before she was transported to the concentration camp. Portrait of a Girl, 1942. I am the mirror for one who speaks. These fresh gaps are wind in the linden trees, cotton flowers of life. A mirror is not much for all of us. But if we listen for reflection, the clear twin face of a groan behind the looking glass, we hear the cat's hair sounds of all people grumbling in the same manner about the air, the food, the earth, the sidewalk. I am the mirror for all the world's silence and the ones who slip through without drawing blood, whose suicides number nothing next to vast doors too tall to reach heaven, locked forever, whose breaking takes generations sometimes, dull copper paint on the back of a lake. I am the mirror for one who is trembling, like a child who has noticed too much, eyes hard olive pits. I think about how life cracks when the vanity glass overturns our hands, sharp pints in bars, uneven edges of ale, crisp indignities of foam. I am the mirror for all who choose not to speak. I crack in the dark. I shine in the snow. This is a new piece written based on the Ukraine also, Psalm 6. I am worn out from groaning. People, mother, father, baby, child, toddler, student, woman, man. The grandmother who yells in Russian at the young soldier to tuck sunflowers in his front pocket, because when he dies, his body will sort out into new blooms on the land of Ukraine, that the yellow suns will redeem themselves, breaking through shrapnel and Molotov cocktail remnants and disappear like cloth. The child's cancer ward bombed out at its corner seams. The teenager named Kira, waiting with her conure parrot for 3 days in line to get into Poland. Those parents underground like sunflower seeds. hiding from the nightly affraids and implosions of fear they cannot show to their children as they clutch Lego backpacks to chests and look at the blue for signs of sky and look to the yellow for signs of wheat. We are kind, we are peaceful, we will feed you soldiers hot tea. The Kiev men say, we will help you to get home. Nightmare, slumber, boyhood, February, winter, imagining, omen, flying, sleep. Now I'm going to segue and read some of the Portuguese-inspired poems from Through a Grainy Landscape. I was reading a bunch of poetry in translation from Portugal, and the book, each poem is inspired from a different line. Because this one is broken. There was a boat, there were many boats, patterned after a fashion into a fleet. There were Portuguese widows who prayed, and those who sang of sailors in their strong sea, amid the sky that we wore like a cape. There was a yellow radiance of sunset and how it used to be. Please ask me, husband, and I will bring you a cup of vino verde. It is what is done when there are no answers. It is what we do and what we have always done. There is a storm gone blind against the curves of the land we fall into. Tears over the bow of a ship ashore, gone at sea for years. We wail and throw our hands against the blanched wood because that is what grief is, a primary feeling that must be exposed, glow, storm, blind. Our men are an assault on we who wait for them as they travel to exotic lands, deciding not to return to a way of life that left them long before they unpacked the dry bread in a cotton bag that we sent along with them on their blessed journeys. With eyes that bear the widowhood of days. The ceiling of the ocean floor is fat, with its tidal drop a mere sandy slope, the barrenness now a symbol, a lost meaning to catch, a rule that the Portuguese fisherwoman on the shore above can attest to, easily nodding in agreement that they are bound together, like time they have wagered and lost, a lifetime of fresh bets and new hands grown old with uncertainty. A rule, a catch, a slip of the tongue, and the courtship will be over. Lost to sea journeys, far away from solid-footed terceira, where black glue is the medicine of forgetting, and a pause is the known secret inside absence, and where love is a shy attachment to hope, the thaw that every woman waiting here tempts with her own fate. On shore, they long to don sadness, like a dark shawl around their forearms. It is a uniform encompassing wool, knitted halfway between loss and joy. The friendliest girls they used to be, these women now waiting on the land, reveal happiness, but with a slight mention or a holding note of the wind, softly reminding them of the men they used to love. This one is sort of nicknamed the life cycle of a shirt. And I grew up in a multi-generation household with grandparents and my parents, and we had a lot of cousins that visited, and recycling today is nothing how it used to be in the Great Depression. And I came from that sort of source. You have to save everything. And this poem takes one item, which is a shirt, and it sort of goes through the life cycle of it. The graphics of home, the life cycle of a shirt. The graphics of home were broken by the Great Depression, the textile mills and the golf ball factories. We came from the Azores and the mainland and Canada, settling in Hawaii and New Bedford and San Pedro, the original navigators. No one was documented. Here was what I learned at home through the life cycle of a shirt. Polyester and cotton, it arrived in the mail from Sears, sent as a hand-me-down from Fall River, carefully washed and ironed and pressed, in a tomato box that had been repurposed and wrapped in brown paper and smelling of stale cigarettes. That shirt was worn and washed and used many times as if it had been new. When they frayed, the elbows were mended, and torn pockets were reconnected with thick carpet maker's thread. When the sleeves were too worn to restore, they were scissored off to make short sleeves, and then the new ends were folded and hemmed until no more. And then there was the time when the sleeves were cut off entirely to create a summer top or costume for playtime, sleeveless, perhaps a vest for a pirate or nurse. When outgrown and too worn for even that, the placket of buttons was removed in one straight hard cut along the body of the shirt front, through and through. The buttons were pulled off by hand for storage in an old cookie tin. The cloth cut into small usable pieces for mending, for doll clothes, for whatever was left. The rest torn into jagged rags for cleaning, and if the fabric was soft enough, used for Saturday's dusting of the good furniture in the den. Whatever was left was sold by the pound, wrapped and rolled into giant cloth balls, sold to the rag man who made his rounds in the neighborhood, all oily and urgent and smiling, as if his soul were a miracle of naturalized birth. This is also in the same vein. This is about my mother and a yellow dress. Woman in a yellow dress. Saved up from pledge or dove. It was that way in those days. Women folk collected stamps and coupons. You got a tank of gas and received Corningware. You hoarded grocery receipts from Albertsons for red encyclopedias and A tickets to Disneyland, stored in a shoebox under the bed. We had a den with deep shelves from Bird's Eye maple, filled with starts and half stops, those multiple sets of volumes, from A to M, from A to D, then the stragglers of AB and AB. On a whim, my mother saved up for the yellow polyester sheath, trim like the body of a bottle, a treasure promised to her from soap and furniture polish commercials, that squeaky bright yellow pumps that accompanied the lemon-colored A-line drop dress, matched with the heavenly scarf that when she wore it was as if she was every movie star, and every woman was vintage Sophia Loren beautiful, on her way to a Roman holiday in a topless sports car, shrouded by her escape. It was my mother who taught me to fear. The irregular verbs of culture that brought the family away from the Azores to the promised land of California, was, were, been, shocking like a past to push away and start over, bore, born, born, as if invisibility could be run away from, to a new start in the garage of an uncle after a cross-country railroad trip, like pioneers. Los Angeles was away from beat and being beaten down. The promised land was to become, became, begin, a location that pushed away and helped folks to start over, pretending you were someone else, to fight, fought, fraught, to flee, fled, to approach a way, to make over, redo, make believe, to start again, as if half-life never happened. Not the Great Depression of your grandmothers or the Great War with its aircraft carriers and new breed of how to be and what to do. California was a gifted promise for the melting pot generation. Goodbye to bend, bent into shape, as the train car runs through every state in the Union, interwoven in a pattern called starting over, in a safe place with a brand new method of keeping, kept, where no one genuflected on Sundays, kneel, knelt, kneeled, knelt, kneeling. To recreate yourself from nothing is a wonderful thing. Of a verbal silence. Of a verbal silence, we saw and thought riot, as if we could be not safe or sure, but not still exactly otherwise or not at all. It was on a lark, a spit, or an urge that we set out to find a hawk, that bringer of change, a soul spirit animal who bears solidity and a certain measure of trust into our lives, that even embedded in sadness, we can have an old found confidence of what we are doing. And the ashes are in the air, blown like soft white seeds, milkweed, contained within a shell that can travel, the wind with bone fragments and bits of earth cloaking our fingertips like cotton gloves meant to protect. We say a few words, half remembering what the last life of words should be, and we name off the flavor of our grief, all emotional and shaken, fingertips, ashes, stone. We watch our souls with a gentle kind of new urgency as they carry us to what most surely come next. Fingertips, ashes, and stone. The fourth ship had no name. We never spoke of the passage from Terceira to New Bedford, nor of the war he fought in Europe and Turkey, what was then Anatolia, a land of celestial blue, returning home back from the sea with a thick woolen sailor's uniform that smelled like cedar and straw and a box of swords. His friend Bud had a tattoo where the ink had run into the skin, so the former image was no longer visible, more like a large blocked out forearm of green blue colors, like a long sea, like a country joined to water, with no housing to be found or excitement either. There was a confidence over the dinners when Bud traveled from Alaska to California for a brief meal of clams and sopash. We gathered as if it were an occasion, like we were treading water around submerged bombs. He said he was tooling turquoise and silver, shaping it soft by hand over time, gifting me with a ring in the shape of a turtle, with a turquoise stone for the rounded shell, and a tail in the shape of the letter U that pinched the skin around my finger every time I wore it. How are we doing on time, Haley?
I have no idea. Just keep
okay. Okay. I think I have a couple more.
I know you timed it, and it's wonderful to hear you.
Okay. I just wanted to
You're fine.
verify. Okay. Sand crumbling down the avenues in Porto. The temper of the ocean buzzes through the downward avenues leading to the shore. The fishwives as they scrape with a file the dorada into sidewalk gutters in front of soaked boxes topped with salt and dirty ice. Earning their keep in words and insults, they bear down with their teeth as they throw each fish into a mountain of more fish, calculating how many crates they go through. Back stiff and fearing solitude, like the decaying mansions up on the Street of Good Friends, near the old Jardim district with its broken iron gates and tumbled front yards. The world is a vein to open and let leave be. In a rush of a wave, living is only for the direful, those who choose to be the river, narrow and sweeping as it meets with the mother Atlantic and joins next, better, always. How easily it is choked back into the larger body as it gives up. I think I'm gonna skip to, I'm gonna close with this, it's a longer poem, and it's about two teenage girls in the backyard with a large bumblebee. The countenance is upon us. The countenance is upon us, he would say, as he trailed the shiny black abdomen of God, flying in circles around the backyard, traversing through the set-up clothesline, strung between a pole and the white fence next door around the plywood playhouse, shaped like a birthday present. There may be many who say, where is the good in all of this? The traveling upon air currents from flower to flower, who lifts the authority of blessed flight, rare in its discrepancy of being sovereign above the light of day, the bee's chase of his passage in flight of time, covering our bellies in the sun, matching the speed at which he tours. Two girls, we are immobile on the 70s chaise lounges, burning under coconut oil. The sound of the bee alone was rough and loud enough to fear. The swarm of inside the worldview of teenagers, of a being greater than ourselves. We are paralyzed for years, it seems, stymied in place, in a shock that feeds off the electricity of hoping the bee does not hover over the honeyed lemonade on the table with its slice of crisp rind attached to the rim of the glass, located next to our brown hands, whisking over the towel, dense in oil and sweat. We were July and extravagant, scared of what was to come. The dark outline of a fettered stinger displayed to us brazenly as the shadow of the bee flies over our bodies, tense and waiting. The insect, powerful and dense, streaming in flight, inches from the bent down grass below us. We dream of nectar and pollen, watching the large black carpenter bee land on the sunflowers, the bachelor buttons, the black-eyed Susans, and the metal swing set. We imagine the dark tunnel bee, his body disappearing from sight like remnants of a night dream flushed into the light of morning. Vanished. We wish we are giants or lords, wanting to trample and dance to the humming bee music that takes over our territory. We cover the sunglasses and dare not to move our legs. We feel the salt water of sweat trickle down our backs as we hold our breath. Venom loading inside the jelly bean body insect, the bee, errant and commanding us to nest, to stop, to tread lightly with our thoughts of back to school days and leaves falling, gray hair, bent backs, canes. We hear the droning blind sound as it starts again. Even the monarch butterflies are nervous as the commanding shadow continues its stalking of the moment from blossom to midlife, like a test, alighting and crawling in the dye of yellow pollen. Like the middle of a fable, we are at a summer crossroads. Wannabe traders unwilling to toe the line, colony queen, somewhere between 1/2 an inch to an inch, with an oval-shaped body, markings. There was once a story about locusts eating a wooden fence, taking the clothes off the back of a farmer. Killer, roller derby queen. Are we in our youth parasites or keepers of truth? Throated in our own style of deep roaring fear, we watch as the bee crawls into the white trumpet flower on the other side of the lea, solitary in its unknown confinement, busy, post-larval, nesting inside the laddered pistil as my dad holds the top rim of the white trumpet flower, while inside is the bee, crawling in stripes, unknowing the trap of the lure. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Millicent. It's so wonderful to hear those poems and just hear you again after 30 years. Wow, it's just amazing. So it was really making me feel emotional here, all those long years. So thank you. I've again put the link to Millicent's most recent book, through a Grainy Landscape, in the chat. So I hope you'll be inspired to buy that and help her out. Definitely, you're reading these poems, I just want to see them on the page. I need to get the book as well. So great. Thank you, Millicent, so much. Now we're going to be moving along to our open mic portion of the evening, and our readers have signed up in advance, so we do have a list and an order, and George Franklin will be opening us up here. And you're muted, George.
Sorry, I thought I was unmuted, but I was muted. Okay, Haley, thank you so much. Millicent, that was great. Thank you. It was a real pleasure to hear you. I'm based in Miami, Florida. My name is George Franklin. And the first poem that I'm going to read was in the winter edition of Sheila-Na-Gig. It's called A Lesson. Once I had the effrontery to tell my grandfather that the ketchup bottle on the dining room table was mine. And he got up out of his seat and slapped me hard. I was 7 years old and he was going senile, but I didn't know that. Neither did my friend David, who was over for dinner and maybe more scared than I was. I remember staring at my mother, waiting for her to say something, to tell her father we were leaving, or even that she had bought that ketchup at the supermarket because I'd asked for it. But she just sat there, paralyzed by some mixture of emotions she never explained. I ran into the living room while my grandfather finished dinner. That night, there was roast beef and potatoes on my grandfather's table and big pitchers of iced tea with mint. His starched shirt was spotless, and he was wearing a Chinese silk tie. He looked the same as always, and the silverware and porcelain were the same as well. The overhead fan never stopped spinning. When he died a year later, I admit I felt nothing. Now, this next poem, in a way, I owe to Haley because I was sending her some drafts of it and she would comment and would tell me that this line was definitely not right and that I needed to work on it and send it back. And I did work on it, so I thought this would be a good opportunity to read it. It's called In the Absence of Coffee. In their city, poets were given no special consideration. They leased apartments on the upper floors of readers' thoughts. A few rooms, comfortable but not showy. The table and chairs inherited from a previous resident. A bed, a television, and some books. Informed that barbarians gathered at the border, their response was initially skeptical, having read Cavafy. But they also remembered his poem about Fernassi the Cappadocian and kept working, typing on their laptops, or if there was no electricity, scratching notes on any kind of paper. Soon, like everyone else, they hid in basements, learned to distinguish the sounds different types of missiles make when approaching a target. Maybe the housing complex next to the supermarket, or the park with its statue of a surly eminence they used to joke about, the one they took selfies in front of. How serious he looks, how disapproving. Is the statue still there? Or does it only exist on a hard drive or in a notebook or memorized so that it can't be lost unless its poets are lost? When pet dogs wander off, they head for the forest, where they turn feral, kill rabbits and squirrels, scavenge for carrion in the snowbanks. But poets don't have the luxury of going feral. In the ruins of a shopping mall, they make fires out of dictionaries, warm their hands over encyclopedias. When there are no more slices of cake or milky tea, no more tables in cafes, or waiters who recognize them, who inquire how the book is coming along, they make do with the swallow of something wet and compose irregular sonnets while filling sandbags to hold off Caesar's legions. In the absence of coffee, they write about mixing the dark browns into soil for the garden and pinwheels spinning to keep away sparrows and crows. In the absence of gardens, they write about coffee, how the machine hissed with steam, and they close their eyes for the first sip. Thank you.
Hello, everyone. I'm John Eustace, and I'm coming to you from Arlington, Virginia, just over the Potomac River from Washington, D.C. I have two short poems I would like to read for you today. But first, I just want to say thank you so much, Haley, for publishing my poetry and for making this event possible. It's a thrill for me to appear in Sheila-Na-Gig. This first poem is in the winter issue. It's called The Latest Hurricane. The latest hurricane, a category 4, has the same name as my ex-wife. So whenever the news is on, it comes up over and over, usually in the context of how much destruction it is causing. Homes demolished, communities wiped out, sturdy trees uprooted. It's an odd name, not seen much these days, used more in our grandparents' generation. My ex was an ancestor's namesake. So it's a bit jarring to turn on the TV and hear that word again and again. They talk about the devastation in its wake, and that sounds about right. The misery, the wailing, the displacement all strike a chord. Only when they bring up the death toll does it start to feel excessive, overstated. Let's turn our focus then to the survivors, the mopping up, rebuilding, heroic efforts to rescue pets and people, power restored. As bad as it seems now, we'll get through this. And my second poem, it's actually my first published poem back in 2018 in another journal. It's called Half Moon by Daylight. I almost didn't recognize the moon, disguised like she was as a pale white cloud, floating huddled with a dozen others, slowly gliding slantwise along the sky. Her diameter was ragged, blurry, whether by some trick of the sun's warm light or willful camouflage, I couldn't tell. It was her outer rim that gave away the game. No cloud could be that round or still. I was alone, but if I hadn't been, I'm sure I would have kept her confidence. I understand the pull of vanity, the wish to be perceived as something else, the opposite of what we really are. In this case, airy and ephemeral instead of solid rock, unchanging, dense. Thank you.
Hello, my name is Ellen Wright. I'm here in Hackensack, New Jersey, which is in the north, Bergen County. And I am going to read two short poems. And I want to thank the editors for selecting my work and for inviting us to read tonight. Thank you very, very much. The first one is the one that was accepted for publication, and it's called The Numbering of Friends. I wrote it as I was convalescing many years ago after having major surgery. The numbering of friends. They came from all over, the people I have met. The loves I didn't know I had came like flakes of early snow that November as I convalesced, having had to face the unavoidable truth that this body was once again trying to take my life. And so I succumbed to the knife and making order of my haphazard, orderless life, just in case it was time to go. But then they came like early flakes of snow. The people I have known but never counted came with cards and gifts and food and flowers and conversation not ruled by time, and the growing list of books to read and hugs and kisses and hands to hold and blessings to embrace. They filled my days with love and shame. And I shamed to be the recipient of so much care, more than I had ever known. The numbering of friends was more than I could bear, like flakes of early snow upon the evergreen bough, weighed down by beauty's momentary manifestations. And the second poem I will read is called Where Guns Melt in the Sun for Dante Wright. Oh, to live in a world where bullets are decorations and guns like butter melt in your hands on a sunny day, and each man is prince of all he surveys, and his children come home every night to dinner and baths and bedtime stories, and their mother never cries because she can't find one of them. and there's never a knock at the door, open to grim gray faces, and a mother never has to listen to her son on the phone and hear his first moments of his death come through as she's screaming his name, and the world changes forever. Never, never, never to be the same again. Oh, to live in a world where bullets are chewable like vitamins and good for you, and guns are buried 6 feet underground, eaten by carrion beetles like the bodies they now undo. Thank you.
Hello, I'm Paul Jones, coming to you from Chapel Hill, North Carolina. And like others, I have 2 poems. I have a book, Something Wonderful, which you see behind me, and then I've posted the link in the chat. Death came for the cardinal. At the airport, someone mistook me for Yanni, but someone else was already on to me. Maybe it was that side trip to Trotsky's house after getting kicked out of Freda Kahlo's for taking those pictures through the windows. Even now, who knows? I was met by Hermano, the most massive man in all of Mexico. In all black, he looked like a welcome shadow, a shade in the hot Guadalajara noon, the kind of bodyguard always on a phone, always patting something in his jacket, always looking past you while looking at the reflection in your eyes, your glasses. He drove fast without stopping. He had passes for every gate in each controlled highway. All the drama seemed like overkill to me. But just months before, he told me the cardinal took a hit here on his way to see the Pope. They shot up his limo. The killers mistook him for El Chapo, or maybe they had been government men. No one was sure of the holy man's sin, only that death came quickly, like hot wind. What matters to everyone is it happened by kids, killers, well armed and mistaken. That one's in the fall, the winter Sheila-Na-Gig. The next one is in the book, but also first showed up in Adirondack Review. Staying in Mexico for these. Traces of a portrait of Che Guevara on a wall in Oaxaca. All that is left of Che are his radical eyes. Weather and other graffiti took his beret, but left its red star newly tattooed on the thigh of a marching, nearly nude, but clearly angry teacher on strike. Che's eyes are supportive, averted, and the kind of kindness our better elders show towards the casual way their youngsters treat their brief moments of beauty and power and grace. The marchers on the wall are so tall, so certain, so committed. Che sees that he's fine without hair, or nose, or lips. He's happy with what he sees, their large homemade signs, their leaderless unity, their hard-won solidarity. Che had gone alone. He had held the wall for so long, setting the pace for revolutions. Now he has begun to vanish. Still, his stare sustains his power without his face. Thank you.
Hi, I think I'm up next. I put up, I don't know if Millicent recognizes it, but I put up a picture from Lisbon, and that was one of the last trips I took before the pandemic. And actually, I'm in San Diego visiting a friend that I traveled with, and we love Portugal. We especially love Porto, so I was really thrilled to hear that poem in particular, but all the references I just really enjoyed, so I wanted to say that. And also everybody before me, this wonderful poetry. So I'm not home, and I know the signal's been a little staticky, a little glitchy, and so I hope everything's good. I don't have my microphone with me, so I assume, can everybody hear me all right? Okay. So I'm reading from San Diego, but I live in Torrance, where Haley lived once upon a time. I'm also working with my friend here on a project that is kind of amorphous that we keep. It also ties in a little bit to Millicent, because it started with us discussing our family's migrations, and that was really across the United States, but we're going into a lot of history and things like that. And then, as Haley mentioned, my last book was with Alan Wolowitz, who's following me, and we had a great time collaborating on a book, so I'll put that in the link in a minute. But I guess my poems are a little more personal, the ones I brought with me, than the previous that had the strong, political connotations, which were really important. But the first one I'm going to read is, I think, from the summer issue of Sheila-Na-Gig, and it's Fontanelle. How many days do I have left in this body, this sagging skin that's already starting not to fit? The supporting frame more prone to fractures, the pulleys more prone to tear. How many miles will I walk? How much will I listen when inclined to talk? How much will I waste hungover or simply indecisive in fear? This morning I felt my skull, its shape and solidity, imagined a time when all softness melts away, leaves nothing but the hardness and hollows. And then the second poem I'm going to read is a poem I had in Gyroscope, where I'm now an assistant editor, which I can't quite believe, but it's also kind of along the aging COVID kind of theme. And it's called Homeopathy. I, the other silver-haired women in the wellness aisle, pandemic refugees from the bottle. We nod, recognize each other above the masks. The other's once bloodshot eyes. Early on, it took some liquid courage to tell night from day, each day dying, bleeding into another. First, the roots emerged, and I marked time in inches, dark and light intermingled, distinguished at last need from pride. Another trapping we shed like bras, what matters above, within, the head, the heart. The liver's overfed, and we're finally sated, or at least resigned. With eyes that smile, endure, we turn to one another, discover cure. Thank you.
Hi. I'm Alan Wolowitz, and I'm coming to you from beautiful Great Neck, New York, on Long Island, where it's dark, so I can't see that it's probably raining. This is a poem that previously appeared in Sheila-Na-Gig, and I wanted to read it tonight because of the times so much remind me of these times. The poem was written about October 1962, and it's called What's Worse? It's about the Cuban Missile Crisis. Now, I know everybody on Zoom tonight is very young, but it was the time of great fear, and it'll be not so much a poem, but history. What's worse? Whatever I felt, I feared. And that night it was in the air. My father wanted bread for supper, and I was sent out in the thick of it. And not knowing to go fast or slow, and which might make it worse. My folks and their demands, The big kids who hung all night in the woods, ready to shake me down. The Russian missiles aimed right at my heart. At any moment now, what did I ever do? And what's worse, who'll be left to tell my tale on this, the night the world would end? A boy sent on his own to Seligman's to buy a seeded rye, make sure it's sliced thin. I wouldn't starve. I had the bread, the caraway stuck in my teeth, the sourness to remind me of home where I'd never arrive. Might as well have the taste in my mouth of what little I'd been while rolling through the heavens. One moment tangling with Dad, the next wrestling with God. Or what's worse, maybe we'd all be blown to bits. I hadn't even said a word, and I'd never get to feel anything at all. This is, thank you so much. This is a new poem, and you know, it's so funny how so funny how we've gone from COVID poems to Ukraine poems. So I've made that shift, and this poem is called The Dnieper, which is after the river that runs through Kyiv, which I finally learned to call Kyiv. I spent a life calling it Kiev, but I understand why we call it Kyiv now. The Dnieper. My grandfather swam the width of the Dnieper on a dare. Though I have it on good authority, there was a kopeck at stake. And he was brought to task by his father, for whom I am named, who said any son of his, and there were 4, ought to know better. But he was secretly proud when he returned the coin to the family that rightly owned. I know those genes to be properly shamed. They run strong and are not much leavened by a generation. Still, there's enough hope in me to make a bingo hall full of old Jewish women breathless. I bear those in me as well, though not so bold as to swim across a river. We were strangers there and sometimes here, as we have often been, the diaspora having landed us many generations in what was often skeptical climes, as it is for everyone who breathes the once fragrant Dnieper that now smells sulfurous, and like the false promise of dreaming, they might swim across the expanse of it, young and almost carefree. Thank you.
Excuse me, I don't have much of a voice tonight. Robert L. Dean Jr., but for simplicity's sake, you can call me Bob. And I live in Augusta, Kansas, which is 15 miles east of Wichita, Kansas. If you don't know where Wichita is, Google it. And my first poem is from the winter edition of Sheila-Na-Gig online. It's called Ice Dancer. You lace the vinyl uppers of your double runners. You are no longer young, but still you use beginner blades. You hop step to pond's edge. One tenuous foot scrapes to a halt, ankle buckling momentarily, the other pushes ahead. You've skated this pond ever since you can remember. Grooves trailing out behind you, learning curves, scars.
Where's the thin ice today? Under your mother's open casketed naked sycamore branch fingers at the far shore? In the center where spirals of your father's elegantly arctic last words taunt from the fickle mirror, which never even reflects a particle of you? Oh, you will amount to something. Etch yourself into the story of your life. Earn a perfect score from the russet cattail skeletons, wagging elongated skulls in judgment, edging their way into the self-portrait of the artist as memory, even if it takes the entirety of a never-ending fog of winter. Geese honk as you wobble too near the one open water hole. Like you, they have chosen to not fly south, to tough it out, to feed on the algae of bitterness. Trembling with a sudden thrill of recklessness, you about face, push off for the place where horizon should be. And the other one I'm going to do is also from Sheila-Na-Gig. It's the first one Haley took from me a couple of issues before the last winter one. It's called Even Though the World is Burning, and the title is a line from Merwin's poem, Rain Light. Is that us standing there with our hands in our pockets, staring into the smoke and mirrors of what we thought was the future? Until this very moment when we stepped into it and found it already the past, a void of breath, devoid of any soul living. And who, we wonder, snapped this photo? And why is it so yellow, ragged around the edges, a torn corner mended with the cracked tape of hope and madness? And which are we, the wings of doves, the cryptic steps of the tomb? Or if this is a decision we are in the process of making, how long will it take, this referendum for or against apocalypse? What if time is shorter than gone tomorrow here today? What if there is no break glass, no alarm lever nearby, no safety in the matches we finger in our vestments of secrecy? What if the little match girl saw no visions and simply froze to death in the night, in the street, hungry and unloved? Do we pity the carcass passing it by on New Year's Day? Do we recognize the scene as us, carefully avoiding us, as responsibility neglected, resolutions unkempt, the spontaneous combustion of a life we cannot explain, even if our ashes could speak? Look there on the film, a flaw or a shooting star, only the photographer can say, but he has vanished into the possible impossibilities of this fiery, shimmering, silverback glass, and left us but a shadow of a confluence in a shroud of smoldering dreams. Thank you.
My name is Elisa Samarco, and I'm reading from Cincinnati, Ohio. And I'd like to read you a poem, some memory about me and my father when I was young. I had thought about reading some more political poems, but I changed my mind, as I always do, right halfway through. And I'm going to read this poem first, and then I have a poem which was so graciously included in the winter edition for Sheila-Na-Gig this year or last year, which I was just thrilled about. So let me first read you Fishing on Holden Beach. I was 9 years old at Holden Beach. My father popped a can of beer. That psh and psh of foam erupted. The can was cool in my hand. He scaled the flounder we caught while its two eyes stared up at me. I remember the thrill of catching it, my father knee-deep, casting over the waves, feeling the fight as he handed me the rod, him holding tight with me, reeling it onto the sand. In his powder blue polo and flowered Speedo, he aimed his Polaroid and took my picture, red braids, and that hideously beautiful fish. It was 1974, the summer I tasted fresh fish and beer. The summer Nixon resigned. I sipped my father's beer while he gutted and cleaned the fish. The whining voice of our president lulled me while I gazed at the transistor radio, expecting Nixon might jump out of the box. My father wiped his hands as he finished. I tipped the can one more time and handed it to him. everything ending in that one last sip of warm beer on that August afternoon. I didn't know we'd never come back to that place again. And I'd like to, this next poem, although I've been writing since I can't remember when, Sheila-Na-Gig was gracious enough to publish one of my poems. And this is the first poem I've had published since, well, for many years, probably, well, I had one poem. Let's just say it was the first poem I've had published in a real poetry journal. So thank you for that. Really appreciate it. There are some words I just can't bring with me. I open my mouth and like spring waters, they seep out, soaking the earth until they find their course, navigating the contours of rocks and pockmarked game trails of suburban deer. Gravity pulls them over and under tree roots, carrying away the leaves that fester all winter. Suddenly, the gunk and its smell, matted, wet, and moldy, are gone. I found the courage to say what I mean. My mother said I had holes in my memory. She would visit my house and leave clues for me, a Bible verse with her notes, a book entitled Finding Your Way Out, a teacup with bourbon, clues to remember what filled those holes, to save me from my gaslighter when he turned the lights down a little more each day. He hid in the basement until the slightest insult sent him piercing through the floors like a bullet through glass. I am Pisces, a creature of water, shape-shifting to fill the buckets he left out for me, until I spilled out, leaving puddles everywhere for the boys to splash on rainy days. She said I had holes in my memory, pieces broken off. When they were too sharp, I threw them in the stew pot until they melted, eating them for dinner so that they couldn't poison us all. Thank you.
Hi, everybody. I guess I'm next. I was trying to type something to Alyssa and couldn't quite get it typed. I'm going to start with one of the poems that was in the winter issue of Sheila-Na-Gig. It's called A Sex Poem. It will contain everything a sex poem needs: a reference to an abalone, half a fig, the soft juice of a peach. It will contain style, gritty and baldly genital, or dear and camouflaged as love. A man will throw himself at another, or a woman daringly speaks of her lover's fingers' talents. Someone will be sorry for something they did or didn't do. The sex will be metaphorical as a drunken unicorn, or as in your face as a purple dildo with weird wiggly things that completely ruin the mood. And someone will burble about blood and death and a singular obsession about someone's lower lip or little toe or curls at the nape of a neck. You know, that kind of shit that makes you wonder if the poets ever really had sex or just knows the contents of every sex poem from here to Yuma's territorial prison, the one that Handsome Jack the Apache kept escaping from. But hey, that's a love poem, and I'm supposed to be writing about sex. Okay, and this last one will be a poem that's currently nominated for the Rising Award for the short poem form from the Science Fiction and Fantasy Poetry Association. It's called Snails. Or maybe they were termites, exotic roaches, quixotic silverfish, Van Gogh come back as a bug. Mad swirls on the old tabletop, left long in the splintered patio. tunnels of staccato rampaging across once pure, sanded, stained surface. Man remaking wood in his own round-faced image, only to be remade. No, not back to tree, but forward to the future of creation. No five-fingered fiend claiming authorship, but bubbling up from the pristine surface, extra-dimensional patterning, a mad excrescence unimagined in our expectations. No, we are not the only artists here. Thank you.
I'm Paula J. Lambert, and I'm reading from Columbus, Ohio. I'm going to read first from my new book. This is The Ghost of Every Feathered Thing. And I'll be reading the poem that's actually the first one in the book, called What They Imply by Depicting a Vulture. The epigraph says, because in this race of creatures, there is no male. That's from the hieroglyphics of Horopalo. In the beginning, all was female. Bird begat bird, each impregnated by the wind, which was also female. In the beginning, vulture was goddess. For 120 days, she was pregnant, and for 120 days, she cared for her young, and for 120 days, she cared for herself, preparing to ride the wind for the 5 remaining days of her year. Imagine being cradled by the breath of the world, levitating through lovemaking. Oh, imagine. In the beginning, we were worshipped, and in the beginning, we could fly, and in the beginning, we were loved by the air itself. In the beginning, we created, and in the beginning, sky bowed to us, and in the beginning, earth reached for us, and oh, in the beginning, we were holy. We were holy in the beginning. And can you imagine that? In the beginning, we were holy, we were whole. And the second poem was published in the winter issue of Sheila-Na-Gig. I'm so pleased and proud to be reading with everyone here tonight, and so happy to be part of the Sheila-Na-Gig family. This did receive the recognition of the Editor's Choice Award, so I'm really pleased for that. And Haley, I thank you for that. It's called Ars Poetica, Wild Geese, after Mary Oliver. If I said each bird I've used in a poem was a symbol for something else, that preening was a metaphor, or hatching, or hefting a seed in a beak specifically designed for that purpose, do you see how the logic might offend the birds themselves? How it condescends even to humans who ought to be better at seeing what the world lays bare before us? We aren't, of course. That's why it's so tempting to burden the birds with being more than they are, something meant to teach us or sustain us, to say even the sky must stand for something else, freedom, maybe, which nowadays does feel like a lofty ideal, something out of reach, something that, however we might aspire to it, slips through our fingers. Illusion, a meanness, not there at all. The sky's not even blue, you know. We are often enough. And if sky's not there, were the geese I heard honking this morning, and I mean loud, so I looked up to watch them pass, just a dream after all, something I'd conjured. But that might be me asking you if the geese were more than geese or less than, and we're right back where we started. What burden do I place on birds for writing them down when I only just happened to overhear them? Still, they were extraordinarily loud, the geese, and they did seem to call to me as much as to each other. I lifted my eyes, and whatever spirit is really did seem to soar inside me. And by that logic, the wild geese did offer themselves to my imagination and yours. And it might be that we're meant to be lifted by the birds, passerines, waterfowl, raptors. We might be meant to lift each other. The geese have a long way to go and might have been showing off. I might have been part of what kept them awake or kept them believing they could achieve their impossible journey. Best maybe to see the birds and as something more. Best maybe to see the world that way and keep writing it all down. Best to see this poem as something more than a poem. Thanks so much.
And Barbara, Lisa's not here, so you're actually up next.
All right. Hi, everyone. I'm Barbara Sable, coming to you from Akron, Ohio, south of Cleveland, north of Columbus. And I'm really delighted to be here reading with all the Sheila-Na-Gig poets. And I thank you to Haley for being the mover and shaker of this wonderful poetry event and journal. I'm going to read two poems from the wonderful, juicy, beautiful anthology, I Thought I Heard a Cardinal Sing, just put out by Sheila-Na-Gig. And the anthology is of Ohio's Appalachian poets, edited by Carrie Gunter Seymour. So I'm pleased to read two poems from that. The first is called The Stargazer. And this is the two poems I'll be reading are both from my manuscript that is almost completed about the Johnstown flood of 1889. And most of the poems are persona poems in the voices of the unknown victims, the unknown drowned. And as is this Stargazer. And it's taken, the poems are taken from the morgue entries of the unknown drowned. So I'll read the morgue entry first. Unknown flood victim number 6, male, age 14, light complexion, regular features, short, gray knee breeches, large aquiline nose, blue eyes, fine, intelligent, and pleasing look, no shoes or stockings. The studs of Orion's belt, bright enough this clear, cold night to trace, connecting the stars from buckle to sword. The nebulae midway down, a misty globe of young stars, right at the tip of my finger. At tonight's library lecture, the image of a 60-minute exposure, imagine, showed stars too faint to be seen from Earth, light years away, the lecturer said, light years. In that moment, my chair lost its hold on the floorboards. Everything in the hall blurred, and I felt lifted up and out of my own skin, spun like a human nebula. I can't even describe the feeling, but walking home, I was still a little wobbly, like that time I stole a couple of swigs from Pop's bottle. Pop tells me to get my head out of the clouds, set my sights on the steel industry, building railroads, cities. The possibilities, he keeps saying, are endless. What ignites me could not be farther from what he goes on about. His life's given over to what's dug from the earth. Iron ore and coal lodged beneath these mountains. But far up above the chimneys and smokestack fumes whirling like chalk dust are whole entire worlds we don't even know, endless worlds. And the second one is called Summer Along the Stony Creek. From a needle eye in the Alleghenies, this sheet of liquid shimmer unseams the earth. Steel rail and forest trail run alongside north and west to the highlands. At this bend, the current circles chisels, deepens for the child's cannonball, the raccoon's cupped hands, ribbon snakes, undulations, a polished assembly of stars. See how the water gathers oak's shadow, hemlock's needle brush in its wending. How the shifting clouds and lift of broad-winged hawk echo on its surface. One with sky, river meets itself as deluge, thin rain as mist. A body could float through time on its muscled back. Our stories are ferried in its depths, caravan of arrowhead, latchkey, crockery, bone. Listen now to the river's patter, reminding us not everything is broken. Thanks. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Barbara. Some of you who are here know that Barbara's been hard at work on putting together Sheila-Na-Gig's first anthology. That's a Sheila-Na-Gig anthology. It is the first 5 years of Sheila-Na-Gig, and Barbara's been curating that and has ordered the manuscript, and it's absolutely fabulous. And now I just have to do my production magic wojo on it, and hopefully that will be out early next fall. So I'm very excited about that project. And just the fact that I've been doing this for 5+ years now, and you know, I've become a part of this amazing community stretching from California to Ohio and beyond is, you know, couldn't be it without all of you. So, you know, thank you for continuing to share your amazing work with me and supporting each other out there as well. It's really been an amazing, amazing journey. So thank you so much. And thank you for all our readers tonight, and for Millicent. And others of you, also have some other poet friends here online tonight. Please feel free to put your book links in the chat as well. We want to support everybody here. So thank you so much.